Before I begin, I just want to, probably most of you know, today is a very tragic day for Am Yisrael, as Moreno Rabbeinu Rav Ovadia Yosef passed away. And if you guys followed the news at all, there were estimated about 800,000 people at the funeral in Israel. That means basically more than 10% of the entire population of Israel went to Yerushalayim to honor the great sage. So the shir tonight is in his honor, and also this is also the third yahrzeit of my grandfather, so it'll also be in his honor. Fun. So I'll speak a little bit about Parshat Lech Lecha, some things that we can learn. So some of you guys might have known, because Avi spoke a little bit about it on the Shabbaton on 2 days ago. Who was the first person to go on a journey to Israel? Who was the first person to ever aspire to make Aliyah? Shout out some names. No guesses? The first one. Avraham Avinu. But was it? Okay? The thing is that in the Torah, we have a great succession of one thing to the next, but because of the way we've split it up to Lane and Shul, sometimes we already forget what the end of the previous week's parsha was. We don't realize there's a connection between the two of them. And we're told in the end of last week's parsha about Avraham's father, Terach. And we're told about Terach, Vayikach Terach et Avram Beno. Terach took Avram his son, Vet Lot ben Haran ben Beno, his grandson Lot, Vet Sarai Kalato Eshet Avram Beno, and Sarah, his daughter-in-law, Avram's wife. Vayitzu itami Ur Kasdim lalechet Artz Canaan. Unprompted, he gets up from Ur Kasdim, the place where he lives, and he gets up to walk towards the land of Canaan, to move there. Vayavu ad Haran, vayashvu sham. Vayu Yimei Terach Chamesh Shanim v'Matayim Shana Vayamat Terach b'Charan. So the Torah tells us that Terach took his whole family, he uprooted them from Ur Kasdim, he went out towards Eretz Canaan, but at the end of the day he failed. He got to this place, Haran, which is before Canaan, it's on the way from Ur Kasdim, and that's where he settled. He didn't continue on his journey to Eretz Canaan, to what we now call Eretz Yisrael, and that's where he died. And that's the story of Terach. And then the next pasuk in the Torah, Vayomar Hashem el Avraham, Lech lecha me'ertzecha meladetecha mibeit avicha ela aretz asher areka. And we later find out that this land is Canaan. So what is it about Terach why is he going to Canaan? Is it just a coincidence that Terach was going to Canaan, and then all of a sudden God commands Abraham, go to this land, and what does this land happen to be? It happens to the exact land, Canaan, that Terach was on his way to anyways, that Abraham was on his way to with his whole family. Then Terach failed, he died there, and Abraham moved on. So, interestingly enough, the people bring many different possibilities for why Terach was on his way to Eretz Canaan. Some people like to point out that the pasuk before Terach leaves for Canaan is Vaytihi Sarah Yakara in Lavalad. Sarah was childless; she couldn't have children, and then Terach took his family, including Avraham, his son, and Sarah, his son's wife, and went to Canaan. Perhaps Canaan was known as some sort of land that was a miraculous land. People who were barren before, couldn't have children, would have children there. Alternatively, maybe Terach had some sort of knowledge of the divine promise that would come to Avraham. Maybe even it was just a coincidence. Maybe Terach was just walking towards Canaan because it was a good place to go and live, and then he happened to go to Haran, and he said, you know what, this is fine for me, and he settled there. And really it was only a coincidence that Avraham ended up being commanded to go to Haran. So if we look at the first Rashi in this week's Parsha, and really this is the Pshat of the Torah, Rashi just does the calculations for us, we find out that because Terach died, Terach was, 70 years old when Avraham was born, the Torah says, and Terach died when he was 205, and Avraham left for Canaan when he was 75. Rashi points out, when did Avraham leave for Canaan? Terach was still alive, okay? So it could very well be, and this has been suggested, that Terach was going along with Avraham, because the pasuk which I read before, Vayikach Terach, so Terach took Avraham, he took Sarah, he took Lot, and then the pasuk says, Vayitzeu itam. It doesn't say Vayitzeu ito. It should say they went with him. They went with Terach. But it says they went with them. So who did they go with? Who did Sarah and Lot and Avraham go with? They went with Terach and Avraham. God spoke to Avraham and said, go to Canaan. And Avraham told his father, and his father decided, I want to come with you. That could fit in, okay? But the question is if that's true, and really no matter which interpretation you take, whether he wanted to go for his own theological reasons, out of his own desire to become closer with God, that he knew something was special about Canaan, or whether it was just a place he wanted to go, why is it that the Torah contrasts, in any case, Terach's journey and Avraham's journey? So let me read to you 2 psukim, and you'll see that there's definitely a connection. Here's the first one, which we've been reading over and over. Vayikach Terach et Avram beno vet Lot ben Haran uvet ben beno vet Sarai kalato eshet Avram vayitzu atam me'or kasdim lalechet artz Canaan vayavu ad Haran vayashvu sham. And then it says by Avram, listen to this language, Vayikach Avram et Sarai ishto vet Lot ben Achiv vet kol rechusham vet asher chashu vet anefesh asher asu b'Haran vayitzu lalechet artz Canaan. Which is these is almost word for word the same words by Terach, Vayavo Artza Canaan. But by Avraham we have Vayavo Artza Canaan. And why is it that Avraham succeeds and Terach doesn't? So the Torah is clearly contrasting them for a specific reason, and I think it's a lesson that us as Bnei Akiva, we who call ourselves Dati Le'umi, religious Zionists, can learn a lesson from. And that's the emphasis of how is it that Avraham got to Eretz Canaan, this promised land. The previous pasuk, before it says that Avraham reached Canaan, says, Vayelech Avraham ka'asher diber elav Hashem. Avraham went as God had spoken to him. Why is it that Avraham makes it and Terach doesn't? Because Avraham is going because of an explicit command from God. Now, many people have pointed out, and there's tons of midrashim to fill in the gap, who was Avraham, right? It's a classic question. The Torah just says, Hashem, Vayomer Hashem al Avraham lech lecha. Who's Avraham? Where's this coming from, right? The midrash says that, he had this whole childhood of destroying idols. Whatever it is, the Torah purposely leaves out any previous story in Avraham and starts off with this command from God. Go to Canaan. And why is it that Avraham goes to Canaan? Because God commands him. Right? Later on, throughout the story of Avraham, we'll see why Avraham was worthy. Right? The Torah is not concerned at this moment with why Avraham is worthy. Later on, we see Leman Yedu ki that he'll command his mishpachto lasot tzedek u'mishpat. That Avraham is a moral person. But right now, the Torah just wants you to know one thing. And that's that Avraham is going to Eretz Canaan because it's the promised land. And that's something important for us to realize in our connection to Eretz Yisrael. That, let's say you love the land of Israel. Why do you love it? Because there's good food there, because it's a nice place, you like visiting it, it's a good vacation spot. But we have to realize that whatever it is, even if it's some sort of even deeper connection than that, that's at the end of the day what Terach had. And that's why Terach doesn't, in the end of the day, make it. That kind of connection is not grounded, and it doesn't last. And that's why we emphasize that in our love for the land of Israel, in our Zionism, it's kasher diber elav Hashem. Why is Avraham attached to this land? Because it's the land which is given to him by Hashem. He doesn't necessarily have a pick and choose of the matter. This is what it is, and that's why it's ours. So if that's one lesson, which I think we can read for ourselves as Bnei Akiva from the story of Avraham, I think there's another lesson which we can find later on. It's not necessarily connected, but in terms of the overall practical, overarching Bnei Akiva messages, I think it's important to read, and I'll go through it now. And that's the story of Avraham and Lot. So as we know, Avraham and Lot are have this connection. Anashim achim anachnu. They're sort of brothers, and even Lot was literally his nephew, right? But they have this joint journey, right? But at the end of the day, we're told that Avraham and Lot, they didn't last together in Eretz Canaan, and we're told that they get into this fight between their shepherds. So we're told in the pasuk, Lo yachlu lashevet yachdav. They both had too much stuff. There was this clash. They weren't able to sit together. Vayhi riv ben ro'ei miknei Avraham uven ro'ei miknei Lot va'kna'ani va'prizi az yoshev ba'aretz. So there seems to be this fight between the shepherds of Avraham and the shepherds of Lot, and then the pasuk tells us at that time the Canaanim and the Prizim were then sitting in the land. So the question to ask when you read a pasuk like this is, what does this have to do with anything? The second half of the pasuk that tells us Akna'ani va'prizi az yoshev ba'aretz. The beginning of the pasuk says there was some sort of fight between the shepherds of Lot and the shepherds of Avraham, and then we're told, and there was these other nations living in the land at the time. What does one have to do with the other? So Rashi over here points out that this fight was not just a practical fight of like, oh, there's not enough space for both of us. You know, this room ain't big enough for the two of us. But it was a fight based on moral values. And that's the connection of the second half of the pasuk. So he says, Vayhi riv lefei she'ayu ro'av shalot risha'im u'mera'im behemoteim b'seidot acherim. The shepherds of Lot would take their animals and they would eat in the land in other people's fields that belonged to others. They said, how can you do this? It's stealing the shepherds of Avraham. Right? Hemaru. So what did they respond back? Natna ha'aretz la'Avraham. God gave the land to Avraham. V'lo ein yoresh, and he doesn't have a son, and therefore v'lot ben achiv yorsho. Lot, our master, is his yoresh. Therefore, right, God promised the land to Avraham. Avraham doesn't have any children. Who's his child? Lot. Ve'ein zeh gazel. Therefore, everything belongs to Lot. We can go wherever we want. Right? And that's why the pasuk says, Hakna'ani va'prizi az yoshev ba'aretz. V'lo zacha Avraham adayim. The Torah emphasizes that the land wasn't yet Abraham's. That they couldn't just steal. Okay? Now, the other lesson which we see from this Rashi is that at the same time of us seeing a connection between us and the land of Israel as promised by God, we also have to realize that it's not a promise that we can do whatever we want with. It doesn't shoo us of our responsibility. It doesn't mean that we can do whatever we want in the land of Israel. This is our land. We can behave immorally. We can steal. We can treat anyone we want with whatever amount of disrespect we want. What's the lesson here? The lesson is that why is the land of Israel ours? It's ours not to do whatever we want with it, but to behave in a moral way. And that's why the Lot at the end of the day can't stay with Avraham, because he sees this promised land to himself and as a member of Avraham's family, but he doesn't understand that it's not just a promise bli gvulot. It's not like without boundaries. The boundaries are that you have to behave morally, and only that way are we ever going to be zoche to the land of Israel, and really to our goal as Bnei Akiva, which is, our connection to the land of Israel, our love for it as a land promised by God, but at the same time realizing that this promise is not free us of responsibility, right? It means because of the promise, it means that we need to do more. It means that we need to do tzedakah and mishpat, which is a term repeated over and over again by Avraham. And that's really two messages, but in Parshat Lech Lecha, which I thought were